The year is 636 CE. A dust storm rolls across the Yarmouk River valley, obscuring the movements of approximately 40,000 Arab cavalry and infantry. Across the broken terrain, Byzantine commander Vahan confronts an impossible calculus. His force, perhaps 80,000 men drawn from Armenian, Syrian, and imperial themes, holds numerical advantage. Yet the mathematics of morale, exhaustion, and strategic extension render these numbers deceptive. The Byzantine Empire, heir to Rome's Mediterranean dominion, faces an adversary it does not yet understand, a confederation unified not by imperial tribute, but by theological conviction and tactical innovation born in the crucible of Arabian warfare. This is not merely a battle. It is the opening movement of a 4-century symphony of conflict that will redraw the map of the known world. The Arab-Byzantine Wars represent one of history's most consequential military competitions. Between 629 and 1050 CE, the Byzantine Empire, already scarred by Persian wars, plague and internal fracture, confronted successive waves of Arab expansion that stripped away Syria, Palestine, Egypt, North Africa, and substantial Anatolian territory. What began as frontier skirmishes evolved into a grinding contest of fortified frontiers, naval supremacy struggles, and ideological warfare that reshaped Mediterranean civilization. The strategic canvas in 629 CE reveals an empire at maximum extension and minimum cohesion. Emperor Heraclius had just concluded a devastating war with Sassanid Persia, reclaiming the true cross and restoring Byzantine prestige through a campaign of brilliant operational maneuver, yet the victory was Pyrrhic. Provincial armies were depleted. Tax revenues from Syria and Egypt, the empire's breadbaskets, barely covered local administration. The thematic system, which would later provide military resilience, remained embryonic. The imperial treasury operated on credit extended by the church. Into this exhaustion stepped the nascent Islamic Caliphate. The Prophet Muhammad's death in 632 CE might have fragmented the Arabian movement. Yet the Ridda Wars consolidated power under Abu Bakr, the first caliph. The subsequent decision to redirect tribal energies outward toward Byzantine Syria and Sassanid Iraq transformed internal religious fervor into external conquest. This was not random raiding. It was a calculated strategic offensive designed to secure resources, validate the new faith's universalism, and exploit the vacuum created by Byzantine-Persian mutual exhaustion. The theological dimension cannot be divorced from the military reality. Byzantine soldiers fought for imperial continuity, provincial loyalty, and Christendom's defense. Arab warriors operated within a framework where military service constituted religious obligation, where martyrdom in jihad guaranteed paradise, and where booty distribution followed Quranic regulation rather than aristocratic privilege. This created asymmetric motivation that Byzantine commanders consistently underestimated. The geopolitical stakes were absolute. Syria provided grain, tax revenue, and recruitment grounds. Egypt supplied the wheat that fed Constantinople's 1 million inhabitants. North Africa offered strategic depth and naval bases controlling Mediterranean commerce. Anatolia formed the empire's demographic heartland. Losing these territories meant more than territorial contraction. It meant fiscal collapse, strategic vulnerability, and the end of Mediterranean unity under Christian Roman civilization. Imagine two superpowers locked in a struggle for centuries, shaping the world we know today. This wasn't a Cold War. This was a fiery, 700-year conflict between the Byzantine Empire, the heir to Rome, and the rapidly expanding Arab caliphates fueled by the new faith of Islam. It all began in the 7th century. The Byzantine Empire, exhausted from its wars with Persia, suddenly faced a new, formidable force bursting out of the Arabian Peninsula. In a shockingly short time, the caliphates conquered vast swaths of Byzantine territory, including Syria, Egypt, and North Africa. These weren't just land grabs. They were the heartlands of the empire, rich in grain, taxes, and people. How did the Arabs achieve this? Their military was mobile, highly motivated, and brilliant at desert warfare. They used camels for logistics, allowing them to strike deep and fast where the slower, more conventional Byzantine armies couldn't easily follow. But the Byzantines were masters of defense and adaptation. They held the line at the Taurus Mountains in Anatolia, turning it into a heavily fortified frontier. Their capital, Constantinople, was the ultimate fortress. Its legendary walls, combined with a secret weapon, Greek fire, a mysterious naval incendiary that could burn on water, repelled massive Arab sieges time and time again. This defense was crucial. Had Constantinople fallen, the history of Europe might look very different. This wasn't just a clash of swords and ships. It was a battle of technology and economies. The Arabs, having absorbed the knowledge of the lands they conquered, became centers of science and learning. They made advancements in medicine, mathematics, and astronomy. The Byzantines, in turn, were masters of engineering, administration, and military science. They maintained a sophisticated bureaucracy and a gold-based economy that was the envy of the world. The two empires also competed for cultural and religious influence, each seeing itself as the center of the true faith and civilization. For centuries, this epic rivalry defined the Mediterranean. It was a relentless cycle of raids, sieges, and battles, but also of trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. This long, dramatic confrontation between East and West, between Cross and Crescent, didn't just define an era. It laid the foundations for the modern world. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey back in time fascinating, hit that like button and subscribe for more epic history. See you next time. Population dynamics favored the caliphate's expansion. Byzantine provinces contained substantial, Monophysite Christian communities alienated by Chalcedonian orthodoxy enforced from Constantinople. Jewish populations harbored resentment over imperial persecution. These groups did not necessarily welcome Arab conquest, but neither did they offer vigorous resistance. In some cases, religious minorities provided intelligence, withheld support from Byzantine forces, or quickly accommodated new rulers who promised religious tolerance in exchange for tax compliance. The strategic geography of the theater imposed harsh constraints. Syria's interior cities Damascus, Aleppo, Antioch lay vulnerable to forces staging from Arabian desert routes. Egypt's Nile corridor channeled invasion but also created defensive opportunities at strategic narrows. Anatolia's mountainous terrain favored defense, but its scattered population limited Byzantine recruiting. The Mediterranean itself formed both barrier and highway, contested through naval warfare that determined whether North African conquests remained isolated or integrated into a unified caliphate. The logistical challenges facing both sides were immense. Byzantine armies required approximately 3 pounds of grain per soldier per day, plus fodder for horses and pack animals. Moving a 40,000-man army required 120 tons of supplies daily, demanding extensive wagon trains or naval transport. Arab forces operated on leaner logistics, utilizing camel caravans that could traverse routes Byzantine supply columns could not follow, but faced water constraints that limited operational tempo during summer months. The fortification infrastructure played asymmetric roles. Byzantine cities like Constantinople, Thessalonica, and major Syrian urban centers possessed sophisticated stone walls, towers, and defensive artillery that made siege warfare costly. Arab forces initially lacked siege expertise, relying on blockade and negotiation rather than assault. As the wars progressed, Arab commanders acquired siege skills through experience and recruitment of Christian engineers, but Byzantine fortifications remained formidable obstacles requiring substantial investment to reduce. The intelligence dimension favored local knowledge. Arab forces frequently recruited guides from Ghassanid Arab tribes who had served as Byzantine foederati but now aligned with the caliphate. These guides provided detailed information on water sources, terrain, garrison strengths, and local political sentiments. Byzantine intelligence networks, dependent on frontier scouts and diplomatic contacts, struggled to penetrate the fluid Arab command structure and predict operational objectives. This was the strategic architecture as the first major confrontations approached. Two civilizations with incompatible visions, competing military doctrines, and irreconcilable territorial claims prepared to test their systems in the furnace of combat. The Byzantine Empire possessed institutional depth, technological sophistication, and 1,000 years of military evolution. The Arab Caliphate wielded ideological cohesion, strategic innovation, and the momentum of a civilization ascending. The aperture narrows to specific battlefields where these forces collided, where doctrine met terrain, and where the future of the Mediterranean world would be forged in blood and calculation. The Byzantine military machine that confronted Arab expansion in the 7th century represented the culmination of Roman military evolution. The empire had abandoned the legion system centuries earlier in favor of more flexible formations suited to multiple threats across vast frontiers. Understanding this instrument requires examining its components with surgical precision. The Byzantine infantry formed around the scutitoi heavy infantry equipped with large oval shields, spears, and swords. These soldiers wore lamellar or scale armor over padded linen, providing protection against arrows and sword cuts while maintaining mobility. They fought in dense formations, typically 8 to 10 ranks deep, with the first 3 ranks presenting a hedge of spear points that could repel cavalry charges. Behind them, lighter infantry with bows and javelins provided supporting fire. The cavalry arm embodied Byzantine tactical sophistication. The cataphracti fully armored heavy cavalry operated as shock troops, their horses protected by armor that covered chest and head. These riders carried Cantarian lances for the charge and Spathian swords for melee, trained to maintain formation discipline during impact. The lighter cavalry, including horse archers recruited from Armenian and Hunnic auxiliaries, provided reconnaissance, skirmishing capability, and pursuit functions. Byzantine tactical doctrine emphasized combined operations, using cavalry to fix or flank enemies while infantry held the center. The technological edge in Byzantine arms was measurable. Imperial armories produced composite bows with draw weights exceeding 150 pounds, capable of penetrating armor at 100 yards. Steel spatha blades, pattern welded for flexibility and edge retention, outperformed the softer iron weapons common among tribal opponents. Byzantine military engineers had perfected the construction of torsion artillery ballistae that could throw stone projectiles 400 yards and onagers for lobbing incendiary materials into fortifications. The logistical apparatus supporting Byzantine armies was extensive. Each thematic army maintained its own supply depots, with grain stockpiled in fortified cities along probable invasion routes. The cursus publicus, the imperial postal system, doubled as a logistics network, with stations providing fresh horses and supplies for military messengers. Naval logistics allowed rapid concentration of forces, with grain ships converted to troop transports capable of moving entire regiments between theaters within weeks. Command and control operated through a hierarchical structure. The strategos commanded each thematic army, typically a political appointee with military experience. Below him, the monarchs commanded divisions of 3,000 to 5,000 men. The Turmarks led brigades, and the Drungaroi commanded regiments. This structure allowed layered decision-making but created friction when strategic objectives shifted rapidly. Written orders, carried by mounted couriers, provided coordination but introduced delays that Arab forces exploited. Now consider the Arab military instrument. The armies that exploded from Arabia combined tribal warrior traditions with innovations born from the Prophet Muhammad's campaigns. The core fighting force consisted of cavalry armed with lance, sword, and composite bow. These riders, mounted on Arabian horses bred for endurance rather than shock impact, excelled at skirmishing, pursuit, and rapid concentration. They fought in loose formations called Quiratis squadrons of 100 to 200 riders, capable of independent action but trained to combine for decisive strikes. Arab infantry, drawn from settled populations and converted tribes, fought with spear, sword, and shield. They lacked the heavy armor of Byzantine scutitoi, but compensated with numerical flexibility and ferocious close-quarters combat skills. Arab tactical doctrine did not emphasize infantry as the battle's anvil. Instead, infantry held defensive positions or exploited gaps created by cavalry action. The true striking power resided in the mounted arm. The weapon systems available to Arab forces evolved rapidly. Initially, Arab warriors carried weapons of varying quality, some Damascus steel blades of exceptional craftsmanship, others simple iron swords. Bows ranged from powerful composite designs imported from Persia to simpler self-bows. As conquests proceeded, Arab forces captured Byzantine and Persian armories, acquiring superior metallurgy and production techniques. By the Umayyad period, Arab armories in Damascus and Baghdad produced equipment matching Byzantine quality. The camel corps represented a unique capability. Camels provided strategic mobility impossible for horse-dependent Byzantine armies. A camel could carry 400 pounds, travel 40 miles daily across desert terrain, and survive for days without water. This allowed Arab armies to stage through routes Byzantine logistics could not support, appearing at unexpected points along the frontier. Camel-mounted archers provided mobile firepower, though their animals' instability made them inferior to horse archers in fluid combat. Arab command structure reflected tribal traditions adapted to unified warfare. The Caliph appointed commanders based on military reputation, tribal influence, and religious standing. These generals enjoyed operational autonomy unimaginable in Byzantine service. A commander like Khalid ibn al-Walid could redirect his entire army based on tactical opportunity without awaiting Constantinople's approval. This decentralization created coordination challenges but allowed exploitation of fleeting advantages. The logistical philosophy diverged fundamentally from Byzantine approaches. Arab armies lived off the land through purchase, tribute, or seizure. They maintained minimal supply trains, using captured fortresses as forward bases rather than constructing elaborate logistics networks. This approach traded sustainability for mobility, working brilliantly during rapid advances, but creating vulnerabilities during protracted sieges or when operating in devastated regions. Intelligence and reconnaissance capabilities reflected organizational priorities. Arab forces employed extensive scout networks, using Bedouin guides with intimate knowledge of terrain and water sources. They interrogated prisoners systematically, gathering information on enemy dispositions and intentions. Byzantine defectors and local informants provided insight into fortress layouts and garrison strengths. This intelligence advantage often allowed Arab commanders to identify vulnerable targets and avoid strongly defended positions. Have you ever wondered how empires of the past clashed in epic battles on both land and sea? Let's dive into the fascinating world of Byzantine Arab warfare, a rivalry that shaped the Mediterranean for centuries. On land, the Byzantine Empire, heir to Rome, relied on disciplined heavy infantry and the legendary cataphracts heavily armored cavalry that could charge through enemy lines like a living tidal wave. Their tactics were meticulous, often detailed in military manuals like the Tactica. They preferred strategic defense, using their network of fortifications and scorched earth tactics to wear down invaders. In contrast, the early Arab armies were masters of mobility. Their light cavalry, mounted on hardy desert horses and camels, could strike swiftly and retreat before the enemy could react. They excelled at raids, ambush, and exploiting any weakness in the Byzantine lines. Their expansion was fueled by incredible zeal and brilliant leadership, allowing them to rapidly conquer vast territories. Now let's turn to the sea. The Byzantine navy was formidable, its secret weapon being the terrifying Greek fire. This mysterious incendiary substance could burn even on water, striking fear into the hearts of their enemies. Their Dromong warships were versatile, capable of both ramming and acting as platforms for marines and archers. The Arabs, initially a land-based power, quickly adapted. They learned shipbuilding from the peoples they conquered in Syria and Egypt, and by the mid-7th century, they were challenging Byzantine naval supremacy. Their fleets grew in size and confidence, leading to massive naval battles that would decide the fate of islands like Cyprus and Rhodes. So, who had the upper hand? It wasn't that simple. The Byzantines had the advantage in siege warfare and heavy-hitting staying power, while the Arabs excelled in speed and surprise. This epic contest of strategy and adaptation, a clash between a deep-rooted empire and a rising power, created a military frontier that pulsed with conflict and innovation for hundreds of years. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this glimpse into military history, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more. The training regimes reflected strategic priorities. Byzantine soldiers drilled in formation maneuvers, combined arms coordination, and siege techniques. Officers studied military manuals like the Strategicon, which codified tactical principles and enemy characteristics. Arab warriors honed individual combat skills through tribal tradition. while leaders learned operational art through experience and consultation with veteran commanders. Both systems produced effective soldiers, but Byzantine professionalism gave them advantage in set-piece battles when forces were evenly matched. The replacement systems determined long-term sustainability. Byzantine themes provided regional recruitment, with soldier farmers receiving land grants in exchange for military service. This created a self-sustaining system as long as territories remained under imperial control. Arab expansion initially relied on Arabian tribal levies, supplemented by converts from conquered territories who sought status and income through military service. As generations passed, these converts formed increasingly large proportions of caliphate armies, changing their character from Arabian to Islamic in composition. This was the order of battle: two military instruments forged in different traditions, possessing asymmetric capabilities and commanded through distinct philosophies. When these forces collided, neither side enjoyed overwhelming advantage. Victory would come to those who best exploited their strengths, mitigated their weaknesses, and adapted to the friction of combat. The canvas was prepared, the instruments were ready. Now comes the application, the moment where strategic theory meets tactical reality, where preparation encounters chance and where history pivots on the edge of blades. The friction begins not with a single decisive battle, but with a cascade of engagements that progressively stripped Byzantine control from the Levantan provinces. The pattern would repeat across decades: Arab probing attacks, Byzantine garrison responses, escalating commitments, and culminating field battles that determined provincial fates. The Battle of Ajnadain in July 634 CE established this template. Approximate location places the engagement southwest of Jerusalem, where Byzantine forces, under the commander Theodorus perhaps, 15,000 men drawn from Palestinian garrisons, attempted to halt an Arab incursion led by Khalid ibn al-Walid. The Byzantine force comprised heavy infantry supported by cavalry wings, arrayed in the traditional formation that had served Rome for centuries. Khalid deployed approximately 20,000 men in a more fluid arrangement, with cavalry concentrated on the flanks and infantry holding a thin center. The engagement opened with archery exchanges that inflicted minimal casualties but tested nerve. Byzantine heavy infantry advanced, maintaining formation discipline as spears leveled. Arab infantry withdrew deliberately, drawing the Byzantine center forward while the wings maintained position. This was calculated tactical design, creating a salient that Arab cavalry could envelop. As the Byzantine center extended, Arab cavalry struck both flanks in coordinated charges. The timing was exquisite, hitting before Byzantine cavalry could reposition for countercharge. The Byzantine formation, designed for frontal combat, lacked depth on the flanks to absorb this pressure. The line bent, then broke as Arab horsemen penetrated to the rear areas where Byzantine officers attempted to maintain cohesion. What had been an organized advance became a panicked withdrawal. Byzantine casualties exceeded 4,000 dead, with survivors streaming toward Jerusalem. The strategic significance outweighed the tactical details. Byzantine command authority in southern Syria collapsed. Arab forces moved freely, besieging Damascus and threatening the entire provincial structure. Emperor Heraclius, observing from Antioch, recognized that garrison forces could not contain this threat. A field army, approximately 50,000 men drawn from Armenian themes and imperial reserves, mobilized under the commander Vahan, with orders to crush the Arab invasion definitively. The Battle of Yarmouk in August 636 CE represented Byzantine attempt at strategic decision. The armies converged near the Yarmouk River, a tributary of the Jordan cutting through volcanic plateau terrain. Vahan commanded the largest Byzantine force fielded against the Arabs, including heavy cavalry, Armenian archers, and Arab Christian auxiliaries from the Ghassanid Confederation. Khalid ibn al-Walid, unified commander of multiple Arab corps, fielded approximately 40,000 men operating on interior lines with secure communications to Arabia. The battle consumed 6 days of maneuvering and engagement. Byzantine forces deployed with their right flank anchored on broken ground, the center occupying plateau terrain, and the left flank refusing contact to protect supply lines running north toward Damascus. Arab forces mirrored this deployment, but with critical differences. Khalid placed his strongest cavalry on his left, opposite the Byzantine right, creating local superiority where terrain favored mobility. The engagement's first phase consisted of cavalry skirmishing and archery exchanges. Neither side committed to decisive action, both commanders seeking to understand enemy dispositions and identify vulnerabilities. Byzantine forces attempted to fix Arab positions while maneuvering cavalry for an envelopment. Arab forces withdrew before contact crystallized, refusing to accept battle on Byzantine terms. On the fourth day, Khalid executed the operational masterstroke. A portion of his force demonstrated against the Byzantine center while his cavalry mass concentrated against the Byzantine right. The attack struck with overwhelming local superiority, collapsing the flank before reserves could respond. Byzantine cavalry attempting countercharge found themselves outnumbered and outmaneuvered by Arab horsemen who used their superior tactical mobility to avoid decisive engagement while maintaining pressure. The Byzantine formation fragmented. The right flank retreated toward the river crossings. The center, threatened with envelopment, attempted to refuse its right while maintaining contact with the left. This maneuver, performed under pressure by partially trained thematic troops, proved impossible. Units lost cohesion. Officers lost communication. What had been an army became armed masses seeking escape routes. Ever wondered how a small group of desert warriors managed to conquer two of the richest provinces of the Byzantine Empire in just a few years? It's a story of faith, strategy, and a world-changing shift in power. Let's rewind to the 7th century. The Byzantine Empire, the successor to Rome, was exhausted. Decades of brutal warfare with the Sassanid Persian Empire had left both giants weak and their coffers empty. The people of Syria and Egypt were also tired of heavy taxes and religious disputes with the capital, Constantinople. This was the perfect storm. Just as these two empires were at their weakest, a new, unified force emerged from the Arabian Peninsula, energized by the new faith of Islam. Following the death of the Prophet Muhammad, the Rashidun Caliphate, led by brilliant military commanders like Khalid ibn al-Walid, known as the Sword of God, set its sights northward. In 634, the Arab armies crossed into Syria. The Byzantines, underestimating their new foe, sent army after army to stop them. But at the decisive Battle of Yarmouk in 636, a smaller Arab force, using superior tactics and knowledge of the terrain, delivered a crushing blow to a massive Byzantine army. It was a turning point. City after city, including Damascus and Jerusalem, fell to the invaders. The local populations, often weary of Byzantine rule, offered little resistance, sometimes even welcoming the change. With Syria secured, the focus shifted to the breadbasket of the empire, Egypt. In 639, the Arab general Amr ibn al-As led a small force of just 4,000 men across the Sinai Desert. It seemed like an impossibly audacious move. Yet, through a series of lightning-fast campaigns and sieges, he outmaneuvered the Byzantine defenders. By 642, the strategic port of Alexandria, a jewel of the ancient world, was in Arab hands. The conquest of Syria and Egypt was incredibly swift and had profound consequences. It marked the end of centuries of Roman rule in the region and the beginning of a new Islamic civilization that would shape the Middle East for 1,000 years to come. These events didn't just change the map. They reshaped cultures, religions, and the very course of history. Thanks for watching. If you found this slice of history fascinating, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the past. See you next time. Egypt's loss dealt Byzantine strategic viability a blow from which it never fully recovered. Egyptian grain had fed Constantinople for a millennium. Tax revenue from the Nile provinces had sustained imperial finances. The loss meant Constantinople now depended on Anatolian and Balkan production insufficient to support a Mediterranean empire. The fiscal crisis forced currency debasement, military contractions, and administrative reforms that transformed the empire's character. The campaign pause that followed reflected both sides' exhaustion. Arab forces had advanced 1,500 miles in 8 years, conquering provinces defended by the Roman Empire's successor state. Logistical strain was severe. Garrison requirements for occupied territories reduced available Mughal forces. Internal political tensions following Caliph Umar's assassination in 644 CE required consolidation before further expansion. Byzantine survival depended on transforming strategic posture from offensive recovery to defensive sustainment. Anatolia became the new frontier, with defensive lines established along the Taurus mountain passes. The thematic system granting soldiers land in exchange for military service expanded to create self-sustaining defensive zones. Naval investment increased to maintain Mediterranean control and enable amphibious operations against Arab coastal positions. The human cost defies precise quantification but shaped both civilizations. Byzantine casualties from battles, sieges, and disease likely exceeded 150,000 soldiers plus uncounted civilian deaths. Arab losses, though lighter in major battles due to tactical superiority, accumulated through garrison duty, disease, and smaller engagements, perhaps 40,000 dead through this period. Population displacement was massive. Christians fled northward from occupied territories. Jewish communities often welcomed Arab rule as relief from Byzantine persecution. Administrative structures adapted or collapsed depending on local conditions. The technological and tactical lessons each side learned would shape subsequent conflicts. Byzantine commanders recognized that traditional heavy infantry formations could not defeat Arab cavalry mobility. Reforms emphasized combined arms flexibility, with increased cavalry proportions and lighter infantry capable of rapid maneuver. Arab commanders learned that fortified cities required siege capabilities, prompting recruitment of Christian and Persian engineers who understood assault techniques and artillery deployment. The strategic landscape had fundamentally transformed. The Mediterranean was no longer a Roman lake but a contested frontier. The Byzantine Empire, which had stretched from Spain to Mesopotamia, now defended Anatolia and scattered coastal possessions. The Arab Caliphate controlled territories from Arabia to Egypt, with North Africa beckoning and Byzantine naval supremacy the last significant barrier to complete Mediterranean domination. The friction of war had consumed armies, toppled provinces, and redrawn civilizational boundaries. Yet the conflict was far from concluded. The aperture now shifts to the prolonged struggle for maritime supremacy and the grinding frontier warfare that would define the next phase of this 4-century contest. The strategic initiative shifted from territorial conquest to maritime dominance. Arab control of the Levantan and Egyptian coasts provided shipbuilding resources and naval bases, but Byzantine fleets remained dominant through Greek fire superiority and centuries of naval tradition. The struggle for Mediterranean control would determine whether Arab conquests remained isolated coastal holdings or integrated into a unified caliphate capable of projecting power across the inland sea. The Battle of the Masts in 655 CE marked the first major Arab naval victory. Arab governor of Syria Muawiyah assembled a fleet of approximately 200 ships drawn from Syrian and Egyptian dockyards, manned by Christian sailors impressed into service and Arab soldiers unfamiliar with naval warfare. Byzantine Emperor Constantine II personally commanded the defending fleet, perhaps 500 dromons, confident that traditional tactics and Greek fire would deliver another decisive victory. The fleets met off the Lycian coast in waters confined by proximity to shore. Byzantine tactical doctrine emphasized maneuver, using superior seamanship to position for ramming attacks and Greek fire deployment. Arab commanders, recognizing their crews' inferior sailing skills, chose to negate this advantage through grappling tactics that transformed naval combat into boarding actions where Arab infantry superiority could dominate. The engagement opened with Byzantine attempts to maintain distance while deploying Greek fire. Arab vessels closed rapidly, accepting casualties from incendiary attacks to reach grappling range. As ships locked together, Arab infantry swarmed aboard Byzantine vessels, overwhelming marine detachments through numerical superiority and close-quarters ferocity. The fighting was savage, fought deck by deck and oar-bank by oar-bank. Byzantine naval discipline, predicated on maintaining formation and coordinated maneuver, dissolved into isolated ship battles. Constantine II barely escaped, abandoning his flagship as Arab forces overran it. Byzantine losses exceeded 300 ships destroyed or captured. Arab casualties were substantial, perhaps 100 vessels lost. but the psychological impact outweighed material losses. Byzantine naval invincibility had been shattered. Arab fleets could contest Mediterranean control. The strategic implications materialized within years. Arab naval forces raided Cyprus, Rhodes, and Crete, establishing forward bases that extended operational range. Byzantine control of maritime trade routes eroded. The empire that had relied on naval mobility to reinforce scattered coastal possessions now faced amphibious threats against its own shorelines. Yet Byzantine naval recovery demonstrated institutional resilience. Investment in shipbuilding increased. The thematic naval system expanded, granting coastal land to sailors in exchange for service, creating a self-sustaining maritime force. Greek fire production, a closely guarded state secret, remained a decisive technological advantage that Arab forces could not replicate. By 670 CE, Byzantine fleets had reconstituted sufficiently to challenge Arab expansion. Have you ever wondered how the Byzantine Empire, the inheritor of Roman glory, managed to survive against one of the most explosive expansions in history? Today, let us dive into the epic Arab-Byzantine Wars and the two legendary sieges of Constantinople that decided the fate of empires. In the 7th century, a new power erupted from the Arabian Peninsula. Following the rise of Islam, the Rashidun and later Umayyad caliphates expanded at an astonishing rate. They swiftly conquered vast territories from the Byzantines, including Syria, Egypt, and North Africa. The once mighty Eastern Roman Empire was pushed back to its core in Anatolia and the Balkans, fighting for its very survival. The ultimate prize was Constantinople, the magnificent capital of the Byzantine Empire. The Arabs knew that capturing this city would not only shatter their main rival, but also open the gateway to Europe. So, in 674, a massive Arab fleet and army arrived at the city's legendary Theodosian walls. The first great siege of Constantinople began. For 4 long years, the city held firm. The Byzantines had a secret weapon, Greek fire. This mysterious incendiary substance could burn on water, turning the sea itself into a death trap for the Arab navy. Defeated by this technological marvel, fierce resistance, and a harsh winter, the Arab forces finally withdrew in 678, but they weren't done. Almost 40 years later, in 717, an even larger Arab force, said to be over 100,000 strong, returned for a second attempt. This was the defining moment. The new Byzantine Emperor Leo III was a brilliant military strategist. He rallied his people for a desperate defense. Once again, the formidable walls and the terrifying Greek fire played a crucial role. The siege dragged on through a brutal winter, causing starvation and disease in the Arab camp. With the help of allies who attacked the Arab rear and a decisive naval victory, the Byzantines broke the year-long siege. The failure of these 2 sieges was a massive turning point in history. It halted the caliphate's advance into Europe from the east, preserved the Byzantine Empire for centuries to come, and protected the development of Christendom. These epic clashes weren't just battles. They were a struggle that shaped the world map as we know it today. Thanks for watching. If you found this piece of history fascinating, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more epic stories. See you next time. Byzantine Emperor Leo III, a military commander elevated during crisis, prepared meticulously. Grain stockpiles accumulated within Constantinople's walls. The fleet received priority resource allocation. Diplomatic outreach secured alliances with Bulgar tribes north of Constantinople, threatening Arab supply lines. The city's defenses received upgrades, with additional artillery platforms and fire projection points installed along the seawalls. The Arab siege commenced in August 717 CE with simultaneous land and naval investments. Maslama's army established camps surrounding the city's land walls, constructing siege lines to isolate defenders. The Arab fleet attempted to close the sea approaches, blockading the Golden Horn and Marmara coast. Byzantine naval responses began immediately, with dromom squadrons deploying Greek fire against blockading vessels. The Arab fleet's destruction was methodical. Byzantine fire ships unmanned vessels packed with combustibles and directed by skeleton crews who escaped at the last moment drifted into anchored Arab squadrons, spreading conflagration. Greek fire projectors engaged at close range, targeting Arab flagships and supply vessels. Within weeks, Arab naval forces were decimated, losing perhaps 400 ships. The blockade collapsed, allowing Byzantine resupply from Black Sea ports. Winter 717 to 780 CE brought catastrophe to the Arab army. Supplies dwindled as Byzantine naval control prevented maritime resupply. The Bulgarian alliance materialized with raids that severed Arab land supply routes through Thrace. Disease spread through Arab camps, killing thousands. Desertion increased as soldiers recognized the campaign's futility. By spring, Maslama's army had lost perhaps 60,000 men to combat disease and starvation. The siege lifted in August 718 CE, precisely 1 year after commencement. Arab survivors withdrew, harassed by Byzantine cavalry and Bulgarian raiders. The fleet, attempting return to Syrian ports, encountered storms that destroyed additional vessels. Total Arab losses likely exceeded 100,000 dead and 1,200 ships lost. Byzantine casualties were substantial, perhaps 20,000 military and civilian deaths, but the empire survived intact. The Second Siege's failure resonated across the Mediterranean world. Arab expansion had reached its limits. Constantinople's survival ensured Byzantine control of Anatolia and preserved a Christian power capable of contesting Caliphate hegemony. The strategic initiative shifted permanently to the defensive for Arab forces facing Byzantium. The naval campaigns between 649 and 718 CE established patterns that would persist throughout the Arab-Byzantine wars. Byzantine control of Greek fire and superior naval engineering maintained maritime supremacy despite territorial losses. Arab forces could contest this control through numerical superiority and grappling tactics, but could not achieve decisive dominance. The Mediterranean remained divided, with Byzantine fleets controlling northern waters and Arab vessels dominant in southern ports. The human cost of this maritime struggle was staggering. Naval losses exceeded 100,000 sailors and marines across both sides. Coastal populations endured raids, enslavement, and economic disruption. The merchant networks that had unified the Mediterranean for centuries fractured, replaced by competing commercial spheres that reduced overall trade volumes. The technological competition drove innovation. Byzantine engineers refined Greek fire delivery systems, developing hand-projected variants for infantry use and improved naval projectors with greater range. Arab metallurgists developed improved steel production, creating weapons and armor that matched Byzantine quality. Shipbuilding techniques cross-pollinated as captured vessels and defecting engineers transferred knowledge between civilizations. The strategic geography of Mediterranean naval warfare imposed constraints that both sides learned to navigate. Winter storms made sustained operations impossible from November through March. Summer calms favored oared galleys over sailing vessels. Coastal bases required extensive fortification to resist amphibious raids. These factors created seasonal campaigning patterns and emphasized the importance of forward bases like Cyprus, Crete, and Sicily. The friction of naval warfare had determined that neither power could achieve complete victory. The Byzantine Empire retained sufficient naval strength to protect its core territories and threaten Arab coastal holdings. The Arab Caliphate controlled enough shoreline and shipbuilding capacity to contest Mediterranean waters and launch opportunistic raids. The result was strategic stalemate, a contested frontier that would persist for centuries, punctuated by dramatic operations but settled into grinding attrition. The aperture now shifts to the Anatolian frontier, where the land campaigns would define the war's final centuries. The strategic character transformed from territorial conquest to frontier attrition. The Arab-Byzantine wars entered their prolonged middle phase, where neither power possessed strength to achieve decisive victory but both maintained capacity to inflict continuous damage. The Anatolian plateau became the primary theater, a landscape of fortified cities, mountain passes, and agricultural valleys contested through annual raiding campaigns that bled both empires slowly. The Taurus mountain range formed the physical frontier. These mountains, running east-west across southern Anatolia, created natural defensive barriers with limited passes that channeled movement. Byzantine strategy fortified these passes, constructing fortress cities like Tiana, Caesarea, and Amorium that controlled access routes and provided bases for counteroffensives. Arab strategy focused on penetrating these defenses, raiding Byzantine interior territories and withdrawing before Byzantine field armies could concentrate for decisive battle. The Byzantine thematic system reached maturity during this period. Anatolia divided into military districts, themes each commanded by a strategos with civil and military authority. Soldier farmers received land grants in exchange for military service, creating self-sustaining defensive forces that could mobilize rapidly. The themes operated as defense in depth, with frontier themes bearing initial attack and interior themes providing strategic reserves. This system traded offensive capability for defensive resilience. Arab forces adopted mirror strategies. The Thoa frontier districts facing Byzantium maintained standing armies that could respond to Byzantine raids and launch their own operations. Cities like Tarsus, Malatia, and Adadna became forward bases storing supplies, supporting garrisons, and hosting troops during campaigning seasons. Annual summer campaigns became ritualized, with caliphs or their commanders leading raids into Byzantine territory to secure booty, prestige, and strategic advantage. The Battle of Akroinon in 740 CE exemplified this new warfare pattern. Arab forces under Suleiman ibn Hisham penetrated the Taurus passes with approximately 20,000 men, targeting the thematic center of Akroinon. Byzantine Emperor Leo III concentrated forces from multiple themes, assembling perhaps 30,000 men to intercept the raiders. The resulting engagement combined traditional tactical patterns with the frontier warfare's strategic logic. Arab forces, encumbered by captured livestock and supplies, accepted battle rather than abandon booty that justified the campaign. Byzantine forces deployed across the raiders' withdrawal route, occupying strong defensive terrain that negated Arab cavalry mobility advantages. The battle commenced with Byzantine archery inflicting casualties on Arab formations struggling to deploy, effectively in constrained terrain. Arab cavalry charges attempted to break Byzantine lines but encountered well-disciplined infantry supported by thematic cavalry wings. The engagement's decisive phase came when Byzantine cavalry executed coordinated flank attacks while Arab forces were fully committed against the center. The Arab formation collapsed, with warriors abandoning booty to escape encirclement. Byzantine pursuit was limited. Leo III recognized that preserving his army for frontier defense outweighed complete enemy destruction. Arab losses exceeded 10,000, with most casualties occurring during retreat through the mountain passes. Akroinon's strategic significance lay in demonstrating frontier defense viability. Large-scale Arab raids could be defeated through thematic coordination and intelligent use of terrain. The victory stabilized Byzantine morale and validated the defensive strategy that would characterize Byzantine operations for the next 2 centuries. The Abbasid Revolution in 750 CE shifted Arab strategic priorities. The new dynasty, based in Baghdad rather than Damascus, focused eastward toward Persia and Central Asia. Byzantine pressure decreased as caliphate resources diverted to consolidating control and managing internal conflicts. This respite allowed Byzantine recovery, with military reforms under the Isaurian dynasty improving defensive capabilities. Yet the frontier warfare continued, grinding both sides through accumulated casualties and economic drain. Annual campaigns produced no decisive results but inflicted continuous damage. Arab raids into Byzantine themes seized livestock, enslaved civilians, and destroyed crops. Byzantine counter-raids into Arab Thur reciprocated damage. Both populations bore immense suffering as frontier regions depopulated and agricultural production declined. The siege of Amorium in 838 CE marked a temporary Arab resurgence. Caliph al-Mu'tasim assembled perhaps 80,000 men, an army larger than any fielded against Byzantium in generations, to capture this strategically vital fortress city. Amorium controlled central Anatolian communication routes and symbolized Byzantine resistance. Its capture would demonstrate caliphate power and potentially open routes for deeper penetration. Byzantine Emperor Theophilos attempted to relieve the city with approximately 40,000 men but was defeated in preliminary engagements and forced to withdraw. Amorium's garrison, numbering perhaps 15,000 soldiers and armed civilians, prepared for extended defense. The city's fortifications were formidable stone walls 30 feet high, multiple defensive circuits, and adequate provisions for months of siege. Arab siege techniques had evolved substantially since early campaigns. Engineers deployed mangonels counterweight trebuchets capable of throwing 200-pound stones 300 yards. Mining operations targeted wall foundations, with tunnels excavated under towers to create collapses. Assault towers provided platforms for archery suppression. Yet Amorium's defenders countered each technique through sorties, countermining, and disciplined archery. The siege consumed 12 weeks. Amorium's capture was Pyrrhic. The city required garrison, draining Arab military resources. Its destruction eliminated a defensive strongpoint but also eliminated a taxable population and administrative center. Within a decade, Byzantine forces reoccupied the ruins and began reconstruction. The strategic balance remained unchanged. The period 850 to 950 CE witnessed Byzantine resurgence under the Macedonian dynasty. Emperors like Basil I and his successors reversed centuries of strategic defense, launching offensives that recaptured lost territories. This shift reflected Byzantine institutional recovery, economic stabilization, and internal caliphate weaknesses as the Abbasid state fragmented. The campaigns of Emperor Nicephorus II focus in the 960s reclaimed Crete, Cyprus, and substantial Syrian territory. Byzantine tactical reforms emphasized combined arms integration, with heavy cavalry supported by disciplined infantry and siege capabilities that could reduce Arab fortifications. The reconquest of Antioch in 969 CE symbolized this reversal. The great Syrian city that had fallen in 638 CE returned to Byzantine control after 3 centuries. Yet these victories were achieved against a weakening opponent. The Abbasid Caliphate was fragmenting, with regional dynasties asserting independence and reducing central authority. The Fatimid Caliphate, emerging from North Africa, contested Abbasid legitimacy and controlled Egypt. The Umayyad dynasty dominated Baghdad, reducing the caliph to figurehead status. Byzantine successes came not from overwhelming strength but from exploiting enemy weakness. The human cost of 2 centuries of frontier warfare defies comprehensive accounting. Byzantine themes closest to the frontier Anatolikon Thracian and Armeniacan likely lost 30% of their populations through casualties, enslavement, and displacement. Arab Thar suffered comparable losses. Agricultural productivity in frontier zones declined by half. Cities that had prospered under Roman administration became fortified garrison towns surrounded by depopulated countrysides. The economic impact was equally severe. Byzantine military expenditures consumed 70 to 80% of state revenue, forcing currency debasement and tax increases that stifled economic growth. Arab frontier districts required constant subsidy from central government, resources that might otherwise fund infrastructure or administration. Trade across the frontier virtually ceased, replaced by smuggling and occasional diplomatic exchanges. The cultural impact shaped both civilizations permanently. Byzantine identity increasingly emphasized Orthodox Christianity as the essential characteristic distinguishing Romans from Arabs. Religious persecution of Jews and heretics intensified, seeking to enforce uniformity. Arab identity evolved from Arabian tribal affiliation to Islamic religious community, with conversion becoming the primary identity marker rather than ethnicity. The technological exchange continued despite hostility. Byzantine metallurgical techniques spread to Arab territories through trade and captured artisans. Arab mathematical innovations, particularly in algebra and astronomy, reached Byzantium through translated texts. Military technologies cross-pollinated, with both sides adopting successful weapons, fortification designs, and tactical approaches observed in captured equipment and interrogated prisoners. The strategic geography of Anatolian warfare created environmental damage still visible centuries later. Forests were cleared to deny cover to raiders and provide timber for fortifications. Agricultural lands were deliberately devastated during campaigns to deny resources to enemies. Water systems were destroyed to complicate siege operations. The Anatolian landscape transformed from fertile, cultivated provinces to militarized frontier zones where survival outweighed prosperity. By 950 CE, the Arab-Byzantine Wars had entered their terminal phase. Neither power possessed capacity for decisive victory. The Byzantine Empire had recovered substantial territory but lacked resources for complete reconquest. The Arab world, fragmented among competing dynasties, could not coordinate the unified effort necessary to threaten Byzantine core territories. The conflict would continue for another century, but its conclusion was determined by external forces rather than bilateral combat. The aperture narrows toward conclusion, examining how exhaustion, external pressures, and transformed strategic contexts finally ended 4 centuries of conflict. 4 centuries of warfare between the Byzantine Empire and successive Arab caliphates concluded not through decisive victory but through mutual exhaustion and the arrival of new powers that rendered the conflict obsolete. By 1050 CE, Seljuk Turkish forces were displacing both Byzantine and Arab authority in Anatolia and Syria. The Crusades would soon introduce Western European military power into the Levanten equation. The Arab-Byzantine wars faded not because either side triumphed, but because the strategic landscape transformed beyond recognition. The casualty accounting resists precision, but certain parameters emerge. Byzantine military deaths across 4 centuries likely exceeded 500,000, with civilian casualties from raids, sieges, disease, and displacement approaching 2 million. Arab military losses were proportionally lighter perhaps. 300,000 dead, but civilian populations in frontier zones suffered comparable devastation. These numbers, though estimates, convey the grinding nature of a conflict that consumed generations. The territorial verdict favored the caliphate decisively. The Byzantine Empire lost Syria, Palestine, Egypt, North Africa, and substantial Anatolian territories, roughly 60% of its territorial extent and 70% of its tax base. The empire that Justinian had reconstituted in the 6th century contracted to Anatolia, the Balkans, and scattered Mediterranean islands. The Arab Caliphate expanded from Arabian Peninsula obscurity to controlling territories from Spain to Central Asia, becoming a superpower that rivaled the Roman Empire at its height. The strategic lessons derived from these wars influenced military thought for centuries. Byzantine defensive doctrine combining fortified frontiers, defense in depth through thematic organization, and naval supremacy demonstrated how weaker powers could resist stronger opponents through institutional resilience. Arab operational art emphasizing mobility, decisive battle, and combined cavalry infantry tactics provided templates for later Islamic conquests in Central Asia and India. The tactical innovations each side developed became standard practice. Byzantine combined arms integration, using cavalry and infantry in coordinated operations with mutual support, influenced European military development through transmission to Crusader states and Italian mercantile republics. Arab cavalry tactics, particularly the feigned retreat and envelopment maneuvers, spread across the Islamic world and influenced Mongol military doctrine through Persian transmission. The technological balance sheet shows asymmetric exchange. Byzantine Greek fire remained unmatched throughout this period, providing maritime supremacy that prevented complete strategic collapse. Yet Arab forces captured Byzantine metallurgical knowledge, improving their weapons and armor quality. The mathematical and engineering knowledge that Arabs transmitted from Persian and Indian sources eventually reached Byzantium, contributing to the empire's late medieval cultural flowering. The logistical lessons emphasized the importance of sustainable military systems. Byzantine thematic organization, creating self-sufficient soldier-farmer populations, allowed prolonged defense despite fiscal crisis. Arab forces learned that rapid conquest was unsustainable without administrative consolidation, leading to sophisticated governance systems that balanced religious law with practical administration of diverse populations. The naval warfare established that maritime supremacy remained decisive in Mediterranean conflicts. Byzantine ability to resupply coastal fortresses and interdict Arab maritime communications prevented complete territorial loss. Arab development of naval capabilities, learning through captured technology and recruited expertise, demonstrated that determined opponents could challenge even technologically superior forces through adaptive innovation. The siege warfare evolution marked significant military developments. Both sides advanced from simple blockade tactics to sophisticated siege engineering employing counterweight trebuchets. mining operations, and coordinated assault techniques. The fortification technology responded with improved wall designs, countermine systems, and active defense tactics that made urban reduction increasingly costly. The economic impact reshaped both civilizations permanently. Byzantine fiscal crisis forced administrative reforms, currency changes, and social transformations that altered the empire's character. The loss of Egyptian grain required agricultural intensification in Anatolia and diversification of food sources. The reduced tax base necessitated military contractions that limited strategic options for generations. The caliphate's economic integration of conquered territories created unprecedented prosperity in Syria, Egypt, and Iraq. Urban populations grew. Agricultural productivity increased through improved irrigation systems. Trade networks expanded, connecting Mediterranean commerce with Indian Ocean trade routes. The fiscal abundance enabled cultural patronage that produced the Islamic Golden Age's scientific and artistic achievements. The demographic consequences shaped population distributions still visible today. Christian populations in Syria, Palestine, and Egypt gradually converted to Islam or emigrated to Byzantine territories. The process consumed centuries and involved complex interactions of taxation policy, social pressure, and religious conviction. By 1050 CE, the religious demographics that would characterize the Middle East for the next millennium were largely established. The cultural exchange, despite religious hostility, enriched both civilizations. Byzantine art influenced Islamic decorative traditions, particularly in geometric patterns and architectural design. Arab scientific texts, particularly in medicine, astronomy, and mathematics, eventually reached Byzantine scholars and through them Western Europe. The philosophical traditions of ancient Greece, preserved in Arabic translation, returned to European awareness through Byzantine and Crusader contacts. The military institutions each side developed proved remarkably durable. The Byzantine thematic system persisted until the empire's collapse in 1453 CE, providing defensive capabilities that allowed survival for 8 additional centuries. Arab military organization, combining tribal levies with professional standing forces, provided the template for subsequent Islamic empires, including the Ottomans, who would ultimately conquer Constantinople. The strategic geography established by these wars defined regional geopolitics for centuries. The division between Christian Europe and the Islamic Middle East, with Anatolia as contested borderland, shaped diplomatic alignments and military conflicts through the Ottoman period. The cultural boundary established between 629 and 1050 CE remained remarkably stable despite subsequent territorial changes. The religious dimensions intensified over time. Initially, pragmatic conflicts over territory and resources acquired theological significance as both Christianity and Islam developed more rigid doctrinal frameworks. The concept of jihad, military effort in defense or expansion of Islam, crystallized through these wars. Byzantine Orthodox Christianity defined itself partly through opposition to Islam, emphasizing theological differences and religious exclusivity. The historiographical legacy influenced how both Islamic and Christian civilizations understood themselves. Byzantine historians portrayed the wars as existential struggles for Christian survival against barbarian invasion. Arab historians frame them as divinely sanctioned expansion, bringing true religion to populations mired in ignorance. These competing narratives shaped identity formation and cultural memory for generations. The comparative military effectiveness assessment yields complex conclusions. Byzantine forces fought defensive campaigns with remarkable tenacity, maintaining institutional coherence despite catastrophic losses. Arab forces displayed superior offensive capabilities during the initial expansion phase, but proved unable to achieve complete victory against determined resistance. Neither side demonstrated decisive superiority, rather, each possessed advantages in specific operational contexts that balanced over time. The technological stalemate that emerged by 950 C illustrates the limits of military innovation absent broader socioeconomic change. Both sides adopted each other's effective technologies and tactics, creating operational parity. Decisive advantage required either overwhelming force, concentration rarely achievable given logistical constraints, or enemy collapse through internal factors. The strategic lessons for contemporary military analysis remain relevant. The importance of sustainable defense systems, the value of institutional resilience over short-term tactical success, and the necessity of adapting doctrine to enemy capabilities all emerge clearly from this 4-century case study. The wars demonstrate that determined opponents can resist superior forces through intelligent use of terrain, defensive preparation, and societal mobilization. The ultimate verdict belongs to history. The Arab-Byzantine Wars transformed the Mediterranean world from a unified Roman cultural space into separate civilizational spheres. The Byzantine Empire survived, diminished but resilient, preserving Roman law, Greek culture, and Orthodox Christianity until transmitting them to Renaissance Europe. The Arab caliphates created Islamic civilization, synthesizing Arabian, Persian, and Hellenistic traditions into cultural achievements that enriched human knowledge. Neither side won decisively. Both were transformed. The conflict that began as Byzantine defense of Roman heritage ended with both civilizations fundamentally changed. The military friction that consumed 4 centuries of human effort, treasure, and blood produced not conquest but coexistence hostile, fractious, but ultimately stable enough to allow both traditions to develop their distinctive contributions to human civilization. The canvas is complete. The strategic design, the order of battle, the friction of campaigns, and the final assessment render visible the arc of conflict that reshaped the medieval world. The Arab-Byzantine Wars stand as testament to human capacity for sustained conflict, adaptive resilience, and the ultimate futility of seeking absolute victory when opponents possess comparable determination and institutional depth. The war machine grinds to silence. The banners are furled. Yet the lessons remain etched into the strategic consciousness of civilizations. This has been War Atelier, where the canvas of history reveals the architecture of conflict, where analysis penetrates beyond narrative to illuminate the mechanisms of military power, where the art of war is examined with the precision it demands. If this examination has deepened your understanding, if the tactical details and strategic assessments have provided clarity amid the chaos of historical combat, then our objective is achieved. Subscribe to War Atelier for continued analysis of history's defining conflicts. Examine our archive covering engagements from antiquity through modern warfare, each dissected with the same analytical rigor you have witnessed here. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Which segment revealed aspects you had not previously considered? What conflicts demand similar treatment? Your engagement shapes future content. Share this analysis with those who appreciate military history beyond surface narratives, who seek understanding of the logistical realities and tactical decisions that determined outcomes. The aperture closes on the Arab-Byzantine Wars, but history's battlefield extends infinitely. Next time, we examine another collision of military systems, another test of doctrine against determination, another demonstration that war remains humanity's most complex and consequential endeavor. Until then, study the canvas. Understand the craft, honor the cost. War Atelier, where strategy meets history.